I'm really pleased to be here, not least because this is one of those kind of early mornings, first day after the clocks have gone back. We're all feeling a little bit discombobulated. We woke up in the morning and it was light. That's a bit weird for a start, some of us anyway. And secondly, our bodies are almost certainly not entirely sure what's going on. So it's really good, first of all, to see so many of you here, but secondly, to have the chance to spend 20 minutes or so actually thinking about our own mental health and well-being. And I suppose my kind of starting point is that this is an area which is growing in terms of its visibility, its recognition, its level of interest, but it is also an area where we still have many, many miles to go before we really feel as though we've got to the kind of place we want to get to. So this is us, in case you don't know about us. We're a national charity with over 140 local Minds associations. I think some local Minds are in the room today, so please do go and make sure you introduce yourselves to them. Our local Minds, particularly in the city in Hackney, Tower Hamlets, pretty much everywhere around the city, and also in wider general Greater London and beyond, of course. And we're also here because we've got a simple ambition, really, which is to change the way that society thinks about mental health. And we've been around for 70 years, and we spent the first 65 years preparing for what's been going on in the last 5 years. And the last 5 years have started to see this kind of awakening of a conversation about this issue of mental health. And our starting point is for us to think about our own mental health. So in your discombobulated morning, as you got up, you probably thought, what am I going to eat for breakfast? Is it healthy? Is it healthy for my body? How many calories am I going to consume at breakfast? And you probably thought, how far am I going to be able to walk today? Could I think a little bit about the number of steps I'm going to take? Should I be thinking about whether I can afford to have 1 or 2 glasses of wine tonight? Should I be worrying about the 6 or 7 I may have had on Saturday night? All these things are increasingly a part of the way in which we're thinking about our physical health, but we haven't yet got to that same place in terms of our mental health. So I'd just very quickly like you to do something in 2 minutes, which is to write down on a piece of paper 3 things that you think are good for your own mental health. So you just very quickly do that. That would be great. So you look like you've done that. That's good. I would guess that how many of you would have said physical activity? Lots of you. Great. Very good. How many of you would have said sitting still, doing mindfulness or something like that? Excellent, very good. How many would you've written down something about what you eat? Also very good. These are all excellent kind of things that help us think about our mental well-being. But we probably don't think about either those issues in the context of our mental well-being or indeed necessarily think about how we are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And these things are massively important to us because we all have good days and bad days in terms of our mental well-being. It is only natural. It is the kind of heart and soul of our human condition. And if we didn't have good days and bad days, then we probably wouldn't be human beings. But it's when those bad days turn into bad weeks, or maybe a bad fortnight, or maybe a bad month, that we need to start thinking really seriously about our mental health. And so that's one of the reasons why in any given year, 1 in 4 of us will experience some form of mental health problem, vast majority of which are treatable, if you like. We can get help and support for it. Quite a lot of our mental health problems we can manage ourselves. But as an issue, this is an issue which has not been very much talked about for a very long period of time, deeply embedded in our English language. Our phrases like round the bend and out of sight, out of mind, because back in Victorian times when those big asylums were being built, they were built out of the town, so you went out of sight because you'd lost your mind. And those big asylums were also built with a bend in the road because people were ashamed of the fact that people had a mental illness. And I don't know if some of you may have been listening to Alan Bennett over the weekend talking about his diaries. He writes beautifully about the way his family used to excuse the fact that his mother was in the big asylum in Lancaster. They used to pretend that she was upstairs having a rest because she was having trouble with her nerves, which is a kind of language that we used to use a lot. So people haven't been talking about it, and why is that? Well, right at its heart has been the stigma around mental illness. We as a society have struggled to get our heads around what it means to experience poor mental health. People have been afraid to talk about it. As a result of that, we often don't exactly know to us or our friends or our work colleagues, and we're worried about it. We don't really want to raise it. Therefore, it doesn't become an issue that people talk about. Therefore, it doesn't become a priority issue. However, the good news is that this is all beginning to change. And right at the very heart of this is this idea of more people being more open about their experiences. And that doesn't matter whether it's people in the public eye. We've seen MPs standing up and talking about it. We've seen sports stars. We've seen folks from arts and entertainment. And yes, increasingly, we're seeing people in the world of business being more open about their experiences. And we know from the evidence that we've done and the Time to Change campaign has looked at as well, that helps to increase overall levels of understanding and awareness. And it's not just people in the public eye that really make a difference to this. It is the thousands and thousands of people who are increasingly prepared to be more open about their own personal experiences of mental health problems, both amongst their friends, on social media, in their workplace, and so on. And as more and more people stand up and talk openly about their experiences, the greater the likelihood is that we tackle the stigma. And, of course, what we start to see is a better and truer understanding of the scale of the issue. So instead of this being something which is not something that people are talking about, increasingly people are talking about it. As we become more open about it, we start to see it becoming more visible. It's visible in workplaces increasingly for a whole variety of different reasons. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. And so as those voices become louder and clearer and stronger, and in fact, the other thing about today, Halloween. Now, Halloween, we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Halloween in the mental health world because every single year, a costume manufacturer will turn up and market a costume with a mental health theme to it. And some of you will remember a few years ago, Asda had different trouble yesterday, but today, a few years ago, Asda had trouble with their mental patient costume, which was a kind of somebody escaping in the imagery of the costume, escaping from the asylum with a blood-splattered costume. Now, what happened in that case was that people with their own experiences of mental health problems kind of rose up as one on social media, and hours later that product was withdrawn. So this kind of voice of awareness and understanding is growing ever stronger. And so this is an ever important voice for your organizations to pay attention to. And we're seeing this kind of newfound awareness and understanding coming into a whole variety of different places. I genuinely don't think we would have seen members of the royal family being so open about this issue of mental health, and the Royal Foundation's Heads Together campaign, which launched earlier this year and will run for another couple of years or so, absolutely seeking to encourage more people to be open about mental health as an issue, but also to make some real differences in terms of people's experiences. So what's going on in the workplace? Well, of course, as many of you will know, sickness absence as a result of mental health problems is now the greatest cause of sickness absence in this country. And I think that is something that we should anticipate seeing going up as people become more open and honest about the reasons for their absence. and we were at a very, really excellent event on Friday, hosted by, in our partnership with the Bank Workers Charity, where we were looking at how do you respond sometimes to some of those kinds of indicators, not necessarily going in the direction that you might automatically expect them to go once you start to do positive awareness-raising activities. And I think it's an important point to bear in mind that as we become more clear and more open about the issue of mental health, then we can expect us to understand that there are more people in our workforces who experience mental health problems. For example, Channel 4 have just done a survey of their staff. They've recently done lots of work internally around disability awareness, and the number of people with declared disabilities has gone from 3%, which they believed was almost certainly not true, and it turned out it wasn't, gone up to 10%. Now, this isn't because their staff have changed massively, it's because people are more prepared to be more open about disclosing the fact that they have a disability. So here are some of the figures. Now, you can play, one of the great things to do at conferences like this is to play stat bingo, which allows you both to see if people's figures coincide, but also how many times different people mention the same numbers. So the estimates in here are in fact increasingly changing, in fact, as the information becomes clearer. Recent survey by the business in the community suggested that 1 in 6 figure is growing quite considerably. Now, we know that for many people, work is the most stressful factor in their lives. Unless you're a Reading Football Club supporter, and 40% of employers have often viewed people with mental health problems as a risk rather than a group of people to support in the workplace. And then there is this massive cost to the UK economy. And when you start to dig underneath that, what are the issues that people are highlighting? Well, first of all, we know that management culture and organisational culture generally, can often play a role in terms of contributing to poor mental health. People in what I think is described, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot today about the role of line managers, but people in that kind of squeezed middle, the line manager, often tell us about that kind of balance between staff below them, telling them they've got too much to do and not enough resource to do it in, and leaders above to maybe telling them to do more with less. Big challenge in these kinds of scenarios. We know that job insecurity clearly can play an issue in terms of people's mental health issues, and we would absolutely encourage those organisations who are considering changing or downsizing or upsizing or relocating or whatever it is you might be doing, to think carefully about how you look after the mental health of your workforce during that time, rather than, as sometimes we hear people saying, well, we'll sort that out once we've done the change management process. We really wouldn't encourage that at all. And I think one of the really big issues that we're beginning to kind of get our heads around is this issue of work-life balance. And as technology and smartphones and so on and so forth become just the fact of life, we are facing this creates huge challenges for everybody, all workers. That blurring of the boundary between your life and your work. It wasn't that long ago that people who worked in the city would get off the train at London Bridge, walk across the bridge. Their home was over there. Their work was in here. That was that. You came home. You sorted out home. It doesn't work like that anymore. We have created blurring of boundaries, and that requires our managers to be highly skilled in terms of how we respond to that. And increasingly, we're seeing businesses and companies looking at how they encourage and support people to think carefully about their work-life balance in a whole variety of different ways, whilst also recognising that you might be working in a global business, you might be working in an organisation where there's a high expectation on your performance and so on. So one of the things that, as I said, we've certainly heard about is people feeling as though it's been difficult to come out, if you like, to be open about their own experiences of mental health. And again, these statistics from a survey we did a couple of years ago now, I think still point to some of the issues that organisations and employees and employers feel about this. So, have you got a good mental health policy? Have you got a culture that means that people can when they're reporting their sickness, be open about why they're unwell. And what can you do to support managers to improve their mental well-being? So I think we're kind of beginning to start to see the component parts of what can be done to create a mentally healthy workplace. And we talk about this kind of broad idea of a three-pronged approach with a very strong underpinning messages for organisations. And those three prongs are, first of all, to think about the well-being of all staff, and there are many really excellent examples of this, both in the city and beyond, in terms of organisations really thinking about their staff's well-being. And that starts with a whole variety of kind of physical things. What can you do in your physical workplace? What else can you offer your staff to encourage them to be physically and mentally healthy? And that I think is the kind of, that's the first step that many organisations are in, and we're seeing that really shift at an incredible pace. Secondly, and I think this is often the hardest area to get into, thinking about how you tackle work-related causes of mental health problems. These are the issues where you are starting to talk about the culture of your organisation. You might need to think about how you support and focus on line managers and equipping line managers to have what we call the "Are you okay?" conversation. Because, you know, we have that thing in our culture, don't we, where people quite often, we say to each other, "Are you okay?" And there is only one answer. And that answer is, "Yep, I'm fine. Thank you very much. Please don't ask me anything else." For lots and lots of people, they're not fine. And we might not be feeling fine at that particular moment. So we really need to be able to equip the line manager to be able to ask that question, "Are you okay?" and actually be prepared to cope with the answer, "No." And we need to be able to equip the employee to be able to answer that question honestly in the right environment, in the right setting. And then the third part of this pronged approach is the having the right support in place for employees who experience a mental health problem. And that will be everything from EAP programs through to fast-track access to specific help and support, through to flexible working policies, whole variety of different things that you can very easily do to support employees who are experiencing a mental health problem. And then the final thing that sits underneath this is the idea of senior leadership from across the organisation being really key. And we encourage organisations to do two things in that space. The first thing is for the most senior person in your organisation to be to talk about mental health as an issue. They may or may not have experienced a mental health problem themselves, but if they do that, then we know from lots of organisations that we've been working with that has a permission-giving effect on the rest of the workforce. And I can think of lots of organisations where that has had a really big impact. A blog by the chief executive or the chief operating officer or something more public where they show their commitment by supporting the Times Change Pledge or something like that. The second thing we suggest around senior leadership is for those senior leaders the most senior person in your organisation who has had personal experience about mental health problems to be open about that as well, where it's appropriate. Again, we know that makes a big difference. So just trying to give you a few examples of some networks that we're a part of and we're involved in and we think are good practice, many of which are close to here. So many of you will be aware of the City Mental Health Alliance, founded by Business for Business, supported by ourselves and Mental Health First Aid, very much kind of sharing best practice and increasing mental health understanding. And I have to say I've been hugely impressed in an environment which has often got a reputation for being terribly competitive and we don't really want to share our secrets with you. Organisations in the City Mental Health Alliance are sharing their best practice and seeing this as an issue that we all have something to contribute and also all have something to learn from. Secondly, This Is Me in the City Please do go and have a look at some of the films that have been constructed as a result of that. Many organisations have taken part in this, initiated, I think, first by Barclays, who got members of their staff some members of the staff to contribute to a very short video where they talk about the fact that they are a member of staff who has a mental health problem. And they're almost certainly a football supporter, or they work in accounts, or whatever it might be, so that to kind of send a broad message that this is an issue that is in every household, every workplace in the country. This programme now has, I think, about 70 organisations signed up to it. And we are also playing a role in this, so we've just introduced the Mind Workplace Wellbeing Index, which, along with other pieces of work that are really trying to help organisations to measure the impact of initiatives inside the workplace, we've launched that this year. The first round is going through at the moment, and we'll be publishing the kind of success stories early next year. We also provide training and support for organisations, and loads of free information for employers, including a whole set of downloadable fact sheets and guides for people to draw from. And of course, support for individuals through our information service, our digital peer support community, Ellie Friends, and also our resources on the web. And that perhaps is a very good place for me to finish, because if we're really going to change the way that we think about mental health in our society, that conversation kind of starts with us as individuals. If we think about how we're going to look after our mental health, understand more about the nature of mental health problems and mental health conditions, and we encourage others to talk about it, then we will all go a long way to changing the way that we as a society think about this fundamentally important issue. Thanks very much indeed.